And speaking of FRC, our next presenter is going as a FRC coach, also FLL coach. So it really shows that you could go a long way starting out from the basics, starting from FLL, going all the way up to FRC. And these competitions are sort of an integral part to education and integral part to the future development of this world. And let's welcome our next presenter. Hello.
Hi, Daniel.
Hey, can you hear me?
We can hear you just fine.
All right. Well, everyone, this is Andrew and Lyndell Clark from FRC 5985 Project Bucephalus. And today they'll be talking about how to kick off an FLL challenge season.
Andrew, come sit down. Come sit down.
All right, there we go. So, hello everyone. Have we got the slide up, Daniel?
Yep.
Awesome.
We're up. So Andrew and Lyndell Clark have been first mentors ever since 2010, and they have 10 years as they have been coaches of Project Bucephalus' FLL team for 10 years, and 5 years they've spent 5 years as the lead mentors of FRC team 5985. They have run the Wollongong FLL regional for 5 years and have served as volunteers, judges, and referees at events across New South Wales, Australia. Both mentors are FRC Woody Flowers Finalist Award recipients. FLL is a passion for Andrew and Lyndell, having trained and mentored 126 FLL teams over a 10-year period. They want to equip every team to enjoy and learn during an FLL season. So without further ado, take it away.
Okay, hello everybody. So we're being joined today by several special guests. On my right, we have the Donut Eating Llamas, another FLL team from Wollongong. They're here to help demonstrate. And on my left, we have members of our Project Bucephalus FLL and FRC teams. All right. So we've been told that our job is to run one of our kickoff events, but a generic one, because we're not entirely sure what the competition is going to be like in the coming year. So we're going to skip things along and try and do our best to pass on as much knowledge as we can in the next 2 hours we have. Can you skip on the slides for us, please, Faith? You got to click on the screen. There we go. So, who are we and what are we doing? Well, there are two Project Bucephalus teams. There is the Lego League team, which has been running for 10 years. This is actually our 11th season. And we have our FRC team. We're at 5985. We've just managed our 5th, and we're about to start our 6th season. Kick it along. We are from the country of Australia. And that red dot down on the side is the town of Wollongong, the city of Wollongong, where we're from. And that's Wollongong. We have the mountains and the sea. It's a lovely place. So if ever in Australia, you should come and visit it. All right. So who are we and what have we done? So in the 10 years that we've been running FLL, we've gone through 10 seasons.
Okay.
Yeah. We have gone to 10 of the national championships in Australia. We've qualified for 10 international FLL tournaments. We've run 6 regionals in Wollongong. I actually gave the wrong number to Daniel. We've actually mentored 170 FLL teams between us. And we've at various points been judges, referees, teachers at competitions across Australia. Now, that's not trying to brag. That's just saying we got a lot of stuff to share. That also means that we still have stuff to learn ourselves. So I'm hoping at some point during this presentation, somebody's going to ask a question that's going to make me learn something. Right. So FRC is also something that started taking up our time. Not that we had a lot of it to begin with. Our team has done pretty well, and we are hoping to represent everybody quite well in what we're doing today. So this is what's going to be happening over the next couple of hours. So format. First thing to realise, when we normally run one of these events, we take all day. We've only got 2 hours. So we're going to try and cover everything we can in the shortest amount of time possible. Now, no team is expected to do everything we say, right? This is drinking from the fire hose here. Take what you can use and go from there. We have a lot of information we're going to be covering. Our goal is to provide a broader picture as possible with everyone learning something. Yep, let's kick in. Right, now, that said, the engineering notebook and team guide that FIRST provides are an excellent starting point, and this is in addition to those things. So bear that in mind. We're trying not to cover too much of what's in those particular documents. So what we're going to do is present a series of units on as many parts of the FLL as we can, assisted by our FLL, FRC, and the Donut Eating Llamas teams. Now, we are going to be putting questions at the end of each unit. So if you post them to the stream, we can answer them. And there's going to be a longer question time at the end, assuming we finish on time, for anyone that wants to ask those questions. So if you ask a question, it will be answered. So experience with doing these things has told us that we should start with project and core values, because if we don't, robot tends to take up all the time we can practically give it. So that's where we're going to begin. So I'm going to now go through a bit about what we're hoping to achieve here. And this part's important because how you compete in FLL is probably more important than the results you get. So there used to be called GP1, that rule. It's not a rule anymore, but it's still something that you should remember. We are gracious professionals. You compete hard against problems whilst treating all people with respect and kindness. That should be the attitude you take into doing this competition. And there's a second kicker. If you join First Lego League with a goal of winning, you're in the wrong place. So take those two things to heart as we go through this, because it is probably the most important thing you can take out of it. So this is the only lesson you get, take those. Now, there are, of course, some limitations here. Number one is we don't know everything. So everything that we're going to tell you is based on our experience. So I'm quite certain there are people out there that are going to add to what we have to say. Also, everything we say is based on our competitions in Australia and some limited internationals. So again, how we do things may not be the greatest fit for you, but that's all right. Secondly, we're not perfect. Every idea we have can be improved, and we can change our minds, and you can even be proven wrong, and we're quite happy when that happens. Lastly, we never stop learning. So everything we present in this is being updated. Every year when we go through this, the slides change as we learn new things. So if you manage to save a copy of this talk or watch it in a year's time, you're going to find that we've changed some things based on the new things we've learned. All right, so do you want to do this part? So this is what FLL teams should do.
All right, so FLL teams should use their own creativity to create a unique robot. You should be inspired by other teams. That's all good, but don't just go copying something else. Try and improve on what you learn and what you see.
There's a motto in FRC: steal from the best, invent the rest. So be creative.
Make your own mistakes and discoveries. This is how you learn best. If everything goes right, you're not going to learn as much as when everything goes wrong. Deal with failure as well as success. It can be harder than it looks, but being able to fail and accomplish is much better than not.
Speaking as a coach, I am proudest of my team when I see them cope with failure with a smile and determination to fix it than I am to see them win anything. So please bear that in mind.
And an FLL team should seek new challenges each season and always set new goals. We've been around for 10 years, but every year and every season, the kids have looked for something new. Whether it's something small or something big, they've always gained new skills. So
that's the FL teams should. Now we're going to get into the FLL teams shouldn't. And this is something that I feel quite strongly about. FLL teams should not fail because of undetected, easy to fix issues. I'm talking about robots failing because a cable is unplugged. If you're going to fail, it should be brand new, spectacular, my robot's on fire mistakes. My personal philosophy is if myself can look at a robot, diagnose it and fix it in 30 seconds, that's a problem that we should have been able to prevent by talking to the team and sharing what we know. So if you get an error, it should be spectacular. 2, an FLL team should not be demoralized. All right, there's no inspiration when a team fails and doesn't know why. And there's also no real inspiration when a team fails and after an event, they found out it was something that could be very easily avoided. So I'd like to avoid that if at all possible. And lastly, an FLL team should not be on their own. There's a ton of information and support out there. So every team should feel able to say, help, and go from there. So to start an FLL, to begin an FLL challenge, the tournament has been released and we're ready to begin a new season. And coaches everywhere are freaking out that they don't know what to do and they don't understand how things work. And some of the kids are probably doing that too. So part 1 is you have to understand the event. So this part is directed at adults. Yes, I'm not talking to the kids right now. I'm talking to the adults. And for every adult out there, coach or parents, doesn't matter. This is a very strange competition. Very, very strange, right? A team that fails on its own will succeed. Adults that do too much actually hurt a team's chances of doing well. And judges are pretty good at telling when that happens, right? It is better for the team to fail together. That's what we want. The mentors teach the skills, but the teams have to choose how to use them. Right? So as an adult, as a coach, my job is to provide guidance, give advice, teach how to do something, but stop there. I can also provide transport and talk to strange adults for them, but the kids decide how to use the skills we give them. And if you can master that, if your team can master that, you will do exceptionally well. Now, the teams are judged through the entire event. So there'll be core values reports filed on how the kids act and how you act. The referees will pass on judgments. We have a saying in our team that if a parent's going to come into a judging session, we bring out the ceremonial duct tape. The tape goes over the mouth so the adult can't say anything. It's very important. And lastly, what we learn is more important than what we win. Now, we're not kidding about that one. The best way to lose, in quotes, at FLL is to try too hard to win it. This is a competition where learning and discovery is way more important than anything else. So there are 3 parts to the competition: the robot game, the project, and the core values. So the core values are big, red, and highlighted for a very good reason. So the way the event works, we have the robot design, we have the innovation project, and the core values. They are all equal parts of the event. Awards are available in each category, and each team gets 1 award max. The robot game is separate, and the robot performance award goes to the team with the highest score, even if they already have another trophy. Now that's important for a reason you'll see in the next slide. The Champions Award goes to the team with the best all-round scores in robot design, innovation project, and core values. It's got to go to a team that has a robot game result in the top bracket of the tournament. Now, in recent years, they've changed what that bracket is, so I'm not putting a number in, but it used to be 40%, but I believe that's not the case anymore. The robot game has no other effect on the competition. So it is entirely possible for your robot to come in second place and you won't receive a trophy or anything. It's quite common. It happens all the time. Trophies mean something different in this event. So, pro tip to those of you that are coaches out there, make sure your team parents understand that part about the robot game ahead of time. In 10 years of FLL, I've had so many conversations with parents that thought, oh, we finished up in the top 5, why didn't we get something, etc., etc. It's a real big cause of confusion. And if you can explain to your parents ahead of time, that will make a whole lot of difference. So judging. Judging is special. Pele, you've got something up on the screen there. There we go, yep. Each team is going to see judges for the core values, innovation, project, and design. The judges will assess the teams based on rubrics which are publicly available. After the judges are finished, after the sessions are finished, the judges will meet, deliberate, and that's where awards are decided. Now, these deliberations are secret. You will never find out how your team did overall. I always say to my kids, if you get an award, you never know if you were the best at that particular thing or whether there was another team that was better, but they got something else. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's a great leveler. It stops any team getting too full of themselves. And it also means that there's a great equality into what goes on. So where do you begin? So many teams will start FLL by looking at the robot game. That's the big, exciting Lego thing. That's not a bad thing to do that, but it can cause teams to miss out on the other parts, on everything that FLL has to offer. So ideally, you should be working on all 3 components simultaneously. Now, we're going to spend some time on each of these areas and give some suggestions on how to proceed. Now, remember what I said at the beginning, we're not perfect and we're always going to learn something. So please, if you think you got a suggestion, we'll take it gladly. So, Lyndell?
All right, so the next thing we're going to look at is the innovation project. So this is the part that makes FLL more than robots. This is what I get excited about. All right, so we're going to look at the City Shaper challenge that's just been on, just so that we can get an idea of what a project might be. So for City Shaper, the teams had to identify a problem with a building or public space in their community, design a solution, and share that solution with others and then refine it. They were free to define the community as any way that it worked best for them. That could be their immediate local community or a global community. All right. They could look at anything in the whole world. So the next thing we're going to look at is how you go about doing an innovation project. So first of all, you need to brainstorm your ideas. Everyone's going to have their own thing that they want to look at. So you need to get as many ideas as you can from the team. Then you're going to get them to conduct research into these things. They need to be able to find a problem within what they're looking for. Then they need to invent a solution for that problem. They need to share it, test it, and refine the solution. In this process, they might need to talk to professionals to do this. They might need to run experiments. They might need to do more research during this time. Then they're going to get their solution ready to present at competition. And they need to be prepared to answer questions from the judges on their project. So they really need to know what they've looked at.
Now, as an example, with
yes.
Lamas, if you'd like
Yes.
to come over and speak into the mic and tell us a bit about how you came up with your project for City Shape. So introduce yourselves too.
Okay, I'm Hugo, and this is the coach.
Hello.
Okay, so we started by thinking of ideas on what idea we should do. So we thought maybe we could do the beach and having plastic on the beach. So we thought of that. We went to our local beach and we found that there wasn't much plastic at the beach, but we saw some black bits in the sand. So we did some experimenting with that, and we found out that that was some magnetic stuff in the sand. So we thought that could be our problem. We talked to Professor Andy Davis. Professor Will Price, and he told us what that was, and we found out that that was mostly iron and something called dioxide. And then after that, we talked to Andy Davis, Professor Andy Davis, and he told us that dioxide was bad for the environment, and it was from steel making. So that's how we came up with our idea, and we were, yeah.
What about your solution? How did you solve the problem?
So our solution, we came up with a drum magnet idea, where we would put what is it called?
So magnet inside of the drum mat.
No, but the thing that drags it.
Oh, beach buggy.
Beach buggy. We put the drum magnet on the back of the beach buggy, and we would roll the drum magnet across the beach, picking up all the iron and magnetic stuff that's not meant to be in the sand.
Good.
Thank you very much.
So that's an example of how a project can go. Inspiration can come from the weirdest places. So.
Right. So for the innovation project, teams are assessed on 2 areas. They have to, at competition, give a 5-minute presentation to tell the judges about their solution. They can do it in any format, any style they like. They can do a song or a dance, a skit. They can do a formal presentation, however they want, but they only have 5 minutes. Then they'll be interviewed for 5 minutes. They need to be able to answer the questions the judges have. This is what a rubric looks like. So there are 4 categories that the judges can put them into: beginning, developing, accomplished, and exemplary. There are several categories that they're looking at. So for this rubric, there was research, their innovative solution, and their presentation. So each of these areas had different things that they were looking at. Judges will also give feedback to the team, saying something they thought was really good about what they did and something that they might need to think about next time.
Right. So the rubrics can change from year to year. So always make the point of checking what they are. First, we'll publish them and use those, understand them. Right. So when it comes to actually building a project, we have something we call the unofficial rules of FLL, something that we've come up with over the years. It actually started off as working with a team in the US called the Cougar Bots, and then Team Smart, but we've sort of expanded it and made it our own. So if you want advice on how to do a project, well, this is how you should do it.
Mm-hmm. All right. So we're looking at what makes a good innovation project and what makes a good presentation. Well, when we find out, we'll let you know on those. But here is what our team uses, the unofficial rules. So first of all, research the project. Even the project has rules. Read the project challenge guide and understand which subjects are valid. Some years, there's been certain criteria that the project has to fit into. Particular animals, one year we couldn't use. There's been other things that we couldn't do. When they were talking about, what was it, Nature's Fury? There were certain things that were not classified as natural disasters. So read what the project challenge is and understand that.
Also, they will often release updates on the project, so make sure you're aware of those as well.
Don't fear the rubric. In fact, the rubric is a great template for your innovation project. It shows exactly what the judges are looking for. So if you follow that, you'll know. So here we have two things. So in this innovative solution section, the kids are asked to clearly explain their proposed solution. To get into exemplary, the highest category, it needs to be easy to understand by all. So that means that the 5-year-old and the professor can understand what the kids are talking about.
Rule 3, research, research, research. You can never do too much of it. And the pro tip here, guys, is do not rely on Google. Go check out documentaries, articles, books, interviews, professionals, and most importantly, hands-on experiments. If you can do an experiment with your team, that is a source of information. Multiple sources are good. And also don't hit up Wikipedia and YouTube. Find other places as well. So number 4, keep it professional.
All right. So involve as many professionals as possible in your project. An emailed list of questions can be just as valuable as a personal interview. You might not be able to get to visit the professional in person these days with Zoom. That's a great way to have an interview with them. I lost count of how many professionals our team used last season.
Yeah, 12.
12? 12. That's a lot of... Oh, and Faith's reminding me, on the phone, often they've had phone calls with the professionals as well. All right, milk it for all it's worth. Every team has their own opportunities and perspectives, locations, hobbies, jobs, contacts. These are all opportunities. Use them to research the solution or even the presentation. There was one year we had a parent who was a chemistry professor, and she was able to give the team a higher level of understanding of the chemistry that was involved in dung beetle poo. No? Cow pesticides, sorry, cow pesticides.
We've also trained a few scout FLL teams. And being a scout teams mean you have access to all kinds of resources that your average school won't. Campsites, hiking, adventurous activities. Those things are all potential ways to look at your project. So find out these little connections and use them. Number 6, start with your passions. So begin your research in areas that interest your team, right? You may have theatre kids, you may have sport kids, you may have karate kids, you may have roller skating kids, hikers, campers, great outdoors, surfers. Find the things, find the hobbies that the kids have and use that as a starting point. You can be surprised how many unique problems can turn up when you start looking at something the kids are already interested in. Rule 7, rocket-powered wheelchairs are cool.
All right, don't restrict your ideas to being sensible solutions. Sometimes crazy ideas are fun and interesting and valuable. Just remember to treat them seriously. If you are using rocket-powered wheelchairs, you need to research the type of fuel that you're going to use, the aerodynamics, and all of that stuff.
And safety.
Oh, yes, safety.
For your FRC teams out there, safety.
Safety. Never underestimate the power of an idea. Don't be too quick to dismiss a project idea. Many solutions have come from ideas that instantly seem lame or uninspiring or just a lost cause. sometimes you'll go back to that idea because nothing else seemed to work.
Now, this one is a suggestion. It's slightly different to the others. This works for us, but it may not work for you. We call it escape the obvious. And what we mean by that is don't pick a subject that is going to be picked by a dozen other teams at the tournament you go to. It can be somewhat demoralizing. Our first international, we rocked up with a problem to treat diabetes. 6 other teams at that event had the same problem and pretty much the same solution. The kids had a bit of a freak out, then they went out and compared notes, but it can still be demoralizing. We find you can get some really interesting problems by following an idea down into a niche and then expanding it. So for an example, animal allies. One of the ideas the kids were looking at was roadkill in Tasmania, particularly of the Tasmanian devils. That was an interesting thing, but it was going to be roadkill of native wildlife was going to be a pretty popular idea. So they went digging a little bit deeper and found out there was a very specific problem with one type of Tasmanian devil. Ones that had been rescued and looked after by humans and then released were more likely to get hit by cars because they weren't afraid of them anymore. That was the problem, a very niche problem, which you could study and then expand on. And that can get some truly interesting ideas. Now, your team may prefer the broader picture. That's fine, but that's just what works for us.
Number 10, join the circus. This is about your presentation. They can involve anything: music, drama, special effects, gymnastics, dancing, mime, or anything you can think of. Be impressive, be passionate, be outrageous. My favorite presentation that our team has done over the years was when we did a magic show. It was for world class, and they used magic as part of their solution to their problem. And so they decided to incorporate that into their presentation. And it was a lot of fun for the kids to do.
That picture you can see on the screen right now, that's our vanishing cabinet. We actually made a team member disappear during the project. It was pretty cool. Number 11, 300 seconds. That's how long you get for your presentation. And you don't want to waste them. So I will always tell a team, when you're doing a presentation, start strong. Set the scene, set the characters in the first few seconds, even if it doesn't involve a skit. Even if it's just a row of you standing in a line and talking to the judges, set the scene strongly. Go over the script before the event and look for words to remove or shorten. Be efficient in how you deliver it, right? Be memorable. That's the big one. I always tell my team, you win at the project if you make the judges laugh. But that's us. You may come up with a different idea. And rehearse. It sounds really good if your kids are polished and they know what they're doing. They can still read off palm cards or scripts, but if they're familiar with what they're saying and they know what they've got to do, it can make a huge impact on the judges.
Number 12, the first read-through should always go long. This is especially if you have done a lot of research. It's a good sign. You will have to cut the material down, but you've done the research. If you have time to spare, go and visit an extra professional or two, or read more books. Do some more research if you can't fill out the 5 minutes.
Right. Frequently asked questions and answers.
The judges will ask questions. How do you prepare? Get your team used to being interviewed before the tournament. Ask them questions. Every meeting, ask them questions. Make sure that they know what they're talking about and can tell the judges what their problem was, what their solution was. What else did you look at? What other ideas did you come up with? Sometimes by the time you get to competition, the kids forgot what they did in August. That was months ago. So every week, remind them by asking them questions so it keeps at the front of their mind.
I believe the engineering notebook and the FLL team guide actually have some sample questions. So get your children used to answering them. Right, this one has caused more grief at FLL teams than anything else that I'm aware of, other than cables coming out. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. In other words, Murphy's Law for the innovation projects. The closer you are to a tournament, the more likely you are to discover that someone has just solved the problem you're researching or come up with the very same idea that you've created. It's happened to us twice. So what I would suggest when that happens, because it will happen to you at some point, don't let it discourage your team. Instead, research it as part of your project and mention it to the judges, right? Nothing looks, or say it's very impressive when the kids say, hey, we had this idea, but we just found out this happened. It just shows how in-depth their research is. And it can actually be a massive point in their favor. And lastly, we have what we call the good project. And this is actually very, very important. You got to understand the purpose of the innovation project. It's discovery.
Yep. So a good project will see team members exploring, learning, asking questions. Anything else they do is a bonus. The whole idea is to get the kids excited, curious about the subject that they're looking at, explore the world and talk to professionals and learn.
Okay. So that covers the project side of things for the moment. Oops. So are there any questions up on the stream? No?
So I guess you mentioned strange solutions earlier, right? Like, don't be afraid to think out of the box. And so what is the strangest solution that a student has told you before, or a student has showed you before, that you thought was really funny, but it works?
What, Faith?
We're just having a think.
What's the strangest one that works?
What year?
Well, the dung beetles one was a good one.
No, that wasn't a...
Yeah, how do you solve the fly problem in Australia? It all comes down to dung beetles. And because we've got so many cattle, the solution to getting rid of the bush fly, the bush flies swarming your barbecue, is introduce dung beetles. That was a fun one.
You guys mentioned so many FLL teams before. What's the hardest part in mentoring so many teams?
Keeping track of which one is doing what.
What each team is up to.
Right. How many?
We now use an Excel spreadsheet to remember. Oh, you're that team. What was your project again? What was your robot doing? Okay, good.
Okay, so are there any other questions in that, or do we move on, Daniel?
We can move on first.
Yep, okay. So what we've got now is some videos of when we were giving an encore performance at the World Festival back in 2015. Now, unlike your normal presentation, this was given in public, so teams could see what a good presentations looked like. And there were a few of them. So I thought that we'd use this as an example of how you can be creative. This is our magic one. And I've also got one from a team called Caught in a Brainstorm. I don't think they're active anymore, but it impressed me with just how powerful they could be. Turn up the volume, Faith.
introduce posture.
Since we seem to be losing some video volume, we'll move on. Right, so as you can see, we've got kids dressed up. We're doing a magic box. We're doing tricks on stage. And we're working in a story into what we're telling. Now, that particular style is something our teams decide they want to do each year. And that's something we're probably going to be continuing. So this year, have we got Faith and the others back yet? No. So this year, the kids dressed up as Thunderbirds. The year before, they were Muppets from Pigs in Space. So that's a creative way to deal with it. There are other ways, which I like showing this one. So this is a team called Caught in a Brainstorm. There is no props per se, no special costumes, no skit. It is, in fact, however, very, very powerful. We'll see if the volume works on this one. So you can, whoops. So you can see from that one, the power of that presentation came from the girls speaking together. They were standing, they were talking heads, but it was still one of the most powerful presentations I've ever seen. And they got their message across really well, and they had an excellent project. So that is an example that is worth looking at. Whoops, and I just skipped.
You're at the beginning.
Yep. Can you go adjust me, please?
Yeah. Technology.
Technology. So when it comes to a project, it is important that you find something that the kids are passionate about, something that they can get behind, and something that lets them explore. Sometimes you may even have a solution before you have a problem. The magic year was that for us. One of our kids was a really, really enthusiastic street magician. He wanted to use magic into our whatever we were going to solve. So that year, we had to look for what effects does magic have? And we ended up tackling shyness and self-confidence, which was a very powerful, again, a very powerful thing to do.
We're ready to go.
Right. So when it comes to documentation, we're going to touch on this a few times during the video. Documentation is one of those things that can take up a lot more time than it's needed to, but it can also be seriously underestimated. So, documentation, what? Well, for the project, it could be a poster, it could be a full-on logbook, a flyer, all this type of thing. Why do you do it? Well, you can leave it with the judge as a reference and as an explanation. And that's very important because as a judge, I really appreciate not having to remember everything. If I've got a document in front of me that says, hey, this team did this, then that makes my job so much easier. Now, not all competitions are going to let you give documentation to the judges, but even if you can't leave it with them, you've still got it in your pit It's something that the kids can use and remember. You can also show it to sponsors or professionals, which makes a very powerful thing. And it is a record of everything you've done, which makes a huge, huge difference. And as Lyndell said earlier, your kids won't necessarily remember everything they did in August, but this makes it easier.
So as a coach throughout the season, I tend to take lots of photos of the team doing things so that when they come to wanting to put something together, a poster or the logbook or whatever, they've got something that they can go back and look at and go, oh yeah, that's how we did that experiment and there's photos there, or that's the professional we went and spoke to.
Okay. Right, so start simple. A very simple project documentation is a one-page handout with a team photo and a logo, a one-paragraph summary of your problem, a summary of your solution, a picture of it, and a list of sources and research. Just some bullet points. That's all you need. Now you can, of course, on the professionals too, you can, of course, get a lot more hardcore. This is the index from our Into Orbit project logbook, right? This is massively comprehensive. So you use the rubric as a guide, you give an executive summary, you list your sources and reports, diagrams and designs, and your implementation. That is something that's important to talk about how you implement your ideas. And also do bear in mind, this is overkill, right? Very few teams are going to need this. Even at an international event, this is overkill. But it does make it easier for our team, so that's why we do it. Right, so now I'm going to get Faith and Sawyer up to explain what we did for our project for City Shaper, and then we'll take some more questions.
All right. Before it, Sawyer, what was our project about?
So our project was about fire escapes, really, and how wheelchair users have a more difficult time using fire escapes since all current solutions that we could find require someone else or some other thing to help you to escape rather than just yourself on your own.
Yeah, and obviously you can't use elevators in a fire. So our solution was technically something that's very similar to an elevator. So we just looked at what things existed and how we could improve them and make it better. So a fireproof, super fast elevator on the outside of the building is what our solution came up with. Made from steel and glass, goes super fast, and gets the wheelchair user out of there.
Awesome.
All right, thank you very much, guys. So yeah, we'll take some more project questions now.
Now I do see a question on the stream about team building exercises.
So,
We will get to that shortly. But Daniel, have we got anything else that's come in?
Let's answer the team building exercises question first. So how do you incorporate team building exercises, and are they mainly or how do you accommodate them?
Yeah, so we'll deal with that in the core values,
which is up next.
Which is up next.
Yep. Is there any other project questions?
Well, I guess let's move on to the core values then.
Okie dokie.
Okay. Right.
Right. So after you've managed your project, the next step is to discover the core values. And this is critically important. I will tell my teams every year, there are plenty of teams that will build Uber robots of death for the robot game, but will never progress anywhere because their attitudes stink. Or they need to learn a little bit more about sportsmanship. So to understand the core values is critically important as a coach, because it's your responsibility to teach the kids how they work. So how you compete is important, just as important as what their results are, perhaps even more so. So number one on the core values hit list is gracious professionalism.
Woo!
Don't worry, if you've been to Brazil or Australia, you know why that happens. Now, gracious professionalism is like sportsmanship. If you're a good sport, you play hard, you play fair, you respect your opponent, you obey the rules. If you're a gracious professional, you do all those things, but you're also rocking up to the opponent's training session and teaching them how to compete better in the lead up to the tournament. That's what your team should be like. And that leads us into co-opetition, cooperative competition. Both of these phrases, by the way, come from Woody Flowers, a man who is going to be sorely, sorely missed. But the idea that you can compete like crazy and mutually benefit with other teams, that's what's going on here. There's no weakness in what's happening. Some of the competitions at these events are fierce, but at all points, you're going to see the teams cooperating and helping each other. If we were to drop the robot on the way to the field, and I've seen so many teams do this, you'll have half a dozen teams on them in about 30 seconds, helping them put it back together again. That's what the core values are about. So these are the official core values. All right, we're going to go through them in a bit and explain how you can get these into your team. Now, like the team building exercises that were earlier, the off season, all those type of things, this is a year-round thing.
Right, the first one is discovery. We explore new skills and ideas. So this is easy for rookies, obviously, because they're learning everything new often, but it is also necessary for veterans. You should be expanding on existing knowledge, look at other teams for inspiration, and trying something new. Every season we try and find something new, whether it's to do with the robot or whether it's to do with the project. And it's not just STEM. It can be leadership, service, teaching, volunteering, all of those things.
Right. Now, and go back a step. So we've just had a question come in on the professionals. So I'll look at that. How do you access the professionals if they weren't directly related? Googling and having the kids seek contacts.
And then we as coaches will make first contact. If it's going to be a phone call, or the kids will draft an email and we'll send it from our email, our coach email address. So we often include an introduction about who we are, who the kids are, what the team is, and what it's about. And
then we'll supervise the contact. But yeah, we make the first contact.
I reckon more than half of the professionals we spoke to for City Shaper, we just looked up on the internet and they were the first result to come up.
What was your, same for donating llamas?
Yeah.
Yep, okay. Right, back to core values. So innovation, we use creativity and persistence to solve problems. So fail fast and fail cheaply. That's what another FRC is saying. Get used to the idea that things are going to go wrong and get past it. Be persistent. In fact, the judges love to hear about all the times that you failed and then kept going. There are 3 ways to solve missions on the field and most problems: the obvious way, the creative way, and the absolutely crazy way. We used to have somebody's role. You are the crazy person. It is your job to come up with a crazy solution, but it has to be viable. So that's how we got some of our more interesting ideas on how to solve missions, with somebody deliberately looking at it upside down and left to right. Right. Looking for inspiration. Now, this is a biggie because I've seen so many teams fail just by copying what they see on YouTube without understanding how it actually works or why it was done that way. So find out, get inspiration from other teams, and then figure out how it works and improve on it.
All right, impact. We apply what we learn to improve our world. Encourage your students to use their skills and values outside of the competition. What can they do? How can they expand on their skills? How can they improve themselves? Can they teach others the skills that they're learning about robots? If you're in a primary school, can you go and do a fun class with your kindergarten students? Can you go show some of the skills that you've learnt with other classes or with other teams, sharing with other teams what you've done?
Some of our students do scouts, like I mentioned before. They will say, what I've learned in FLL has made me a better leader at scouts. And this is things that the judges want to hear about. It's a way for them to reward you for being able to recognize the value of what the kids have learned. So take what they've got and use it. Don't just leave it locked up in the Lego room. Right, next, inclusion, respecting each other and embracing our differences. So this is very, very practical. Make sure everyone has a voice. The veterans can teach the rookies. Good ideas can come from the 9-year-old that just touched Lego for the first time last week, or the 16-year-old that's been doing this for more years than I can remember. The different ways of looking at things, like actually make a point of celebrating it and making a point of getting that information across. So all this stuff is about building a team that accepts each other. Now, a rule I apply in both FRC and FLL, you don't have to like each other, but you do have to respect each other. And a team that works to that credo actually does quite well, because if the directive is respect, your team will do very, very well.
Right. Teamwork. We are stronger when we work together. Encourage your team to form an identity, a fun logo, something about what they're going to wear at competition, whether it's a funny hat or a color pink or a horse or whatever it is. Encourage team identity. Develop a team structure. How is the team going to operate? Use teamwork games as training and include the students in planning before and after each meeting. Make sure everybody knows what's going on, how the team is going to operate.
Oops.
And the last one.
Now, the teamwork games, this is something we do. I believe we've got a question about that. This is what we do every week. We will do at least one teamwork game, usually 3 or 4.
The kids love them.
Where lateral thinking exercises, cross the river without getting your feet wet, get everybody over the electric fence.
Build a structure from marshmallows and spaghetti.
Yeah. Encourage
dry
them.
Spaghetti.
Yeah, dry spaghetti. Encourage everyone to get involved and give them practical exercises in how to work together. And that works incredibly well. And make the entire FLL experience a team event. You succeed or you fail as a team and you celebrate both. And the fun. There's no point in doing this if you don't enjoy it. None at all. So celebrate the small wins. Do team celebrations. Set fun traditions. And most importantly, enjoy the tournaments. Dance, sing, devour large amounts of sugar.
One of our team's traditions is that we get some hot chips or wedges after we've been on an excursion out to see a professional or something like that. We used to have, sometimes we'd have ice cream, and in the summer we get to go for a swim if they've got their work done.
Do the llamas have any traditions or celebrations?
Do you eat donuts?
We eat lots of sweets.
We eat lots of sweets.
Okay. So one last tip, right? Meet up with other teams. You're going to get opportunities during the season, and meeting with another team can be invaluable, like practicing on their table. Do a swap that can reveal a host of robot issues. Sharing your ideas, teaming up to do a display. sharing an opportunity, visiting workshops and schools, and any chance we get to go on an international event, we'll make a point of visiting a school or a group near where we're competing. And that has created some fantastic opportunities for friendship and the kids to learn about each other. Most recently, we were in California for the North American Open event, and we got to visit a school, and our kids had a blast. And the school was going to be coming here, but COVID put an end to that. So we're hoping to revisit that come replay.
All right, so again, we have a rubrics for core values. So that if you go through and look at that, that will tell you the sorts of things that the judges are looking for and maybe give you an idea of what sort of questions that the judges will ask the team.
Yeah. So also bear in mind that when you're in a judging session, this tells you what the judges want to hear. So it is very important that they're able to talk about it. Because the judges, in my experience, are looking for reasons to give your children points, to reward them. So it's up to your kids to give them that opportunity.
So in a judging session, teams are assessed on their performance during a tournament and their work during the season. So it is based on the rubric, as we said. So make sure you look at it. GP reports. So these could be positive or negative. These are filed by others during the competition. They could be the people watching the practice tables or at the robot game or in the pits. You never know who's watching what your team's doing.
Personally, I make a practice, I make a point of every tournament I go to. I look at what's happening around the practice tables, and I'm making sure to file a positive report for anyone I see that's showing GP at the practice tables, because sometimes that can be the toughest place to be in a tournament, particularly if your robot's failing and you've got to get off the table because it's someone else's turn. So stuff like that.
So in a typical judging session, you'd have 10 minutes, and this can change between countries or even seasons how core values is judged. We've had a few different ones over the last few years. In Australia, usually we get a teamwork challenge. Now this challenge has to remain secret. You can't go and tell anyone else about it because or talk about it, because then that gives other teams an advantage. So everyone's presented with the same challenge. And then there is an interview, a 5-minute interview after the activity. So you want to, again, get your kids used to asking questions. What does gracious professionalism mean? How have you shown your skills or used your skills outside of first? Things like that.
Right, so some optional items. Some regions ask for a core values poster. It might be required, or it can just be a useful tool. So making one is not essential most of the time, but check with your region first.
It can be very helpful though to help the kids see what they have done in the core values.
Yeah. Also, sometimes you're allowed to prepare a short description of what you've done with core values. So nothing fancy or dramatic. It's not another performance. It's not usually required, but if your team has done a lot, it can be quite helpful in getting some points across. But again, if the judges don't allow it, it's still the kids have thought about things to say. So it's a useful tool. Okay, now documentation. For the same reason that you want documentation for your project, some documentation for core values is really helpful. So if you're going to start simple, give me a 1-page handout that is your team photo and a logo, who you are, what you do, some challenges you've overcome, achievements that you've made, and some impact you've done on yourselves or somebody else. There's your 1-pager, hand it to the judge. I'm going to have a much easier time remembering who you are and what you've done. Just remember though, it's not essential. Right, and this here is the comprehensive. This was our part of our core values index. And again, this is overkill. Use the rubric as a guide, do reports, background, learning, challenges. You can really fill it in. So we have our guys write a 2-paragraph report on activities they do when they go and teach others or do Skype calls with other teams, things like that.
Or do a demonstration, things
Yep.
like that.
Just, it also serves as a history for the kids to go back and say, oh yes, we did that. It makes the coach's job a lot simpler.
As I said before, I take photos of lots of the kids doing stuff during the season.
Right. Now, do we have any questions on core values? So Faith and Sawyer, you want to?
So going back to the question on the stream, how do you guys incorporate team building exercises? Like, is it a sort of weekly kind of thing, off season, or do you guys just like, hey, we feel like going across the river without getting ourselves wet? Like,
so what we'll typically do when we start a team meeting, we'll do a sit down. This is what we're going to achieve today. We will then spend a first working session of however long we have. Then we'll take a break, have some food, and we'll do some core values activities then. At least 2, usually more. And then we'll get into the next work session after that. So we make it part of each meeting and we use it to break up the work.
Now our team meetings, because our team is homeschooled, we will meet during the day for a couple of hours, probably 3 to 4 hours once a week. That's what our team does. Other teams we mentor might only have 2 hours to meet. So we'll work out how to do a core values activity with them as well.
Ummers, what do you do with exercises? Do you do similar things?
More informal things, yeah.
Yeah.
But we practice a lot of the interview type things.
Yeah. Does that answer the question, Daniel?
right. And how do you guys access professionals if they weren't directly related? Like you mentioned earlier that a parent of one of the teams were, say, a chemistry professor, and then you got to ask them and like sort of learn a lot from them, right? So how do you access professionals if they weren't directly related to the team? Like, say I have a project that's focused on this certain subject, like, oh, how do I solve water pollution? And you don't really have any connections. How do you go from there to contacting professionals and setting up meetings with them? And like,
Faith, you want to come and answer that one for us? How do you contact professionals
that aren't related to the team?
So what we normally do is if we have an idea of a professional that we want to talk to, we just Google search for the professional in our area. So as we said, with our project, we were looking at lifts. So we just searched up lift engineers, New South Wales, Wollongong, Sydney, went with the first link, sent a contact us, sent them an email saying, hey, if we didn't get a reply, we'd go to the next link and just keep on sending until we'd get something back or someone willing to talk to us. So yeah, that normally works a lot and we've gotten a lot of professionals that way.
Hugo, do you want to come up and...
How do you contact your professionals?
Yep.
So usually we'll get the kids to write an email and then the parents will send it to the professional. So similar to what Faith said, with Google search the person. So we were looking for metals on the beach. So we looked up metals expert Wollongong and we found a link and then we found an email and we just went from there.
Awesome. Sorry, did you have anything to add? No? Okay. Right, and I see another question on the stream about the format of the meetings being structured. Yes and no. So we have like basically, I guess, 5 parts. We have the sit down and talk about it when we start. Then we have the work period, which is very unstructured. The kids do what they need to do. Then we have the break where we do core values and food and run around and scream and all the rest of it. Then we have another work period, which again is very open-ended. The kids are given broad directives. They know what to work on. And then we finish with another meeting. We sit down and we go through what we achieved, what still needs to be done, so everyone's aware of it. So there is an overlying structure, but within that structure, it can be pretty chaotic.
all right. And a few more questions. How do you receive the funding necessary to start a FLL team?
Okay, so
What we started ours with We went to Rotary clubs.
Yeah.
Back 10 years ago.
10 years ago, we visited a Rotary club and asked. Since we've been working with other FLL teams in Australia, there's Google grants you can apply for. So we've been helping teams apply for those grants to get funding to enter the event. We've also seen teams do the levy approach. Every family pays $50 and that covers it. Do you guys do something similar?
Yeah, we just get parents to pay a little bit each.
Yeah. We've also seen teams that will do fundraising. One of the teams from down at Nowra in Australia, you can do get 10 cents for can and bottle returns. So they have funded their team through doing a lot of bottle and can returns.
Is it 10 cents a can, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, and they've raised over $1,000.
Doing that.
That's a lot of cans.
Yeah. So yeah, you can be creative. They've also had know of teams who have approached a local business in their area, and the business has been it's aligned their philosophies with what FIRST is about, and so they've paid for the kids' entry fee to the tournament.
Great. And for someone coming into FLL, what is the most important trait that they should have? Like, what is the most important, say, characteristic, personality, or mindset they should have?
Sorry? No, face? I always say an ability to learn and willingness to work hard.
Yeah.
Lamas, you got anything to add to that?
Everyone's got their own unique thing that they're good at. So we just like to make sure everyone gets a chance to show off what they're good at.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the ability to learn is probably the biggest one.
Yep.
All right. Shall we move on to robot? We've got a lot to cover with robot.
Right. Please.
Okay. All righty. So we have kept mostly to time because we now have an entire hour to devote to building robots. And we do this last because there are teams that would gladly have us work with them for like 2 or 3 hours to do robots. So we're going to try and break this up into meaningful chunks. We've got some robot demonstrations from Izzy, Faith, and Hugo. And we are going to try and keep this meaningful and organized. So take a look at that list of subjects, and that only just starts to cover the top. So there is a lot of ground to cover in building a robot. Now, it's good to recognize that this is a tough thing. This is a robot competition after all, but it's also equally important to make them understand that this is only 1/3 of the competition. Robots aren't everything. Right, Faith, what are you doing? Right, so step 1, is we're going to go through what requires to judge a robot.
So again, there is a rubric. Again, there's the ratings, the categories, and the comments for the judges. All right, so the judges will be looking at the mechanical design, the programming, and the strategy of your robot.
Right. Now, the
robot design session allows teams to show off the design of their robots. Teams do not operate their robot, and there is now no FLL table in the room. The team should demonstrate how their attachments move and operate, describe and show how their code, display documentation, describe their development process, and answer questions.
Now, at this point, we're going to introduce something called the RDES, the Robot Design Executive Summary. Now, I believe the engineering notebook is an example of this. In a way, it's something that you can use or you can design your own. Now, we've developed our own style over the years, and rather than use the engineering notebook, we've continued using what we've done. So we're going to share that with you. I strongly suggest you look at the engineering notebook as well, just so you can see what's happening. So in an RDES, it's a template to help the teams explain the robot to judges. So this is an organized talk. Your kids don't have to memorize anything. They don't have to be uber creative. They've just got to pass on information. So it's not a requirement for Australian competition, but some events, I believe the World Festival used to require it. That's a very useful tool. Now, all you have to do is read from a piece of paper. There's no need to memorize anything or put on a show. Please bear that in mind. I don't want to put more onto a coach than they're already dealing with. And there's normally a limit of 4 minutes. But again, check with your partners to find out how your tournaments run. Year to year, things change. So here's an example RDS outline that we use. We'll start with some robot facts. Does your robot have a name? How many pieces it uses? Things like that. Then we'll get into the design phase. We'll talk about something fun. Like the kids used to talk about how many hours they had to spend arranging the cables so they wouldn't break. The process that led you to where you are now, and any unique features on your robot. Strategy and innovation, again, talk about how you approach the missions. Innovative features you have on how you do it. Programming, give me style as a judge. I want to see comments. I want to see how your code has been organized. I want to see structure. I want to see functions, programs, variables. I want to see how you've coded. And lastly, I want the demonstration. I want you to point out the highlights of your design and programming. So your kids should go into that room ready to show their code, whether it's a printout or on a laptop. Now, when we get to the documentation, same type of deal as everything else we've said, right? If you want to do it simple, you should, but this is the one I would spend some extra time on. If you're going to do 1 pages for everything else, make this a 2-pager. Spend some time getting it right. Team name and logo, some pictures that show me a summary of your robot design and your process, even if it's just pictures or text. Some code, innovations, point out what you think is special, and the challenges and lessons you had to overcome. The engineering notebook gives you a lovely template to use for this type of thing, and it's very, very helpful for the judges. As a judge, I love it when a team gives me documentation so I can look at what's special about their bot. I want to make sure I reward you for all the hard work you've done.
Can I just mention with documentation, we make sure that each section, our innovation project, our core values, and our robot design are separate. We don't put it all into one great big document because the judges, often you're seeing them at different times or different judges. So you want to be able to separate out what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Right, so here's the contents of our robot design logbook. So code, design process, innovation, it's all there. Right. So do we have any questions on the judging or the documentation? Anything else we'll get to in a moment?
Nope, not right now.
Not right now? Awesome. All right. So we got your robot ready to roll? They're not straight away, but we're ready? Yep, okay. So developing an FLL robot strategy, it depends what you're wanting to achieve. If you're wanting a robot that works, and something that makes the kids get really excited, the first thing you're going to have to do is sit down and think. If your team starts the process by just jamming pieces together, it isn't going to end well. So here's our design process. We start with robot development roles. We understand the game. We look at our robot classes. We design basic principles, strategy and robot planning, programming. So it's long. So first step is, how do I get a team of 10 kids working on a robot together without them killing each other? particularly if there happen to be siblings on the team. Isn't that right, Izzy? Right. And this is how we answer that question. This is our robot roles for a team. We use these in the teams we mentor, and we use them in our own team. They are suggestions only, so feel free to tweak as required. So, number 1 is strategy. If you are on the strategy role, your job is to plan and document each run from base or home or launch area, depending on what they call it, right? The path you take, the motors you use, the missions you do. Your job is to figure out what sensors you need to use and what your robot designs are. If you've got to drive under a bridge, you need to tell the rest of your team, my robot can be this many studs tall and not a stud taller. You've got to look at the missions and start looking at how you design the attachments to make them work. It's your job to tell the pathfinder where you need to go. We'll tell them all about one in a moment. You've got to give the design specs to those building the core robot, and any special code tasks go to software. So you have direct inputs into each of the other roles. Then we have the pathfinder team. Your job is to build a really simple robot. My personal favorite is Riley Rover from Damien Key. Look up his website if you want to see how to build it. He's made the instructions free. And just put similar sensors on it as you put on your robot. The wheel size, everything else is irrelevant. Program the robot to get to the area of the board that the strategy tells you to, or where you think it's important or likely, right? Don't do the missions. That's not important. That comes later, right? Give your code requests to software. And once the core robot is finished, they will adapt your code to work with that actual robot. And if software has built custom code, like the code you've written may just be spaghetti code. Go here, do this, use sensors. But then the core robot team and the software team will take that and convert it and make it proper for the main robot. The Pathfinders is a great role for a beginner because they don't have to do anything fancy. They've just got to make the robot move. Then we have the core robot team. Your job is to build the competition robot. So build requirements, sensors, width, height, weight, all that type of stuff. We usually get you to design a way that things can clip onto your robot. You've got to build the actual robot. Test it with repeatable turns and movement. Put it down on the mat and say, drive forward 2 rotations. Then drive back 2 rotations. And if it doesn't end up in exactly the same spot, you have a problem. Do a turn for 2 rotations and then do it again. If you don't end up in exactly the same spot, you have a problem. Do your best to make a robot that can do repeatable moves. Test the Pathfinder code and identify the differences. Using a different size wheels, you may find that everywhere they say put rotations in, you just got to add 20%. Works quite well. Lastly, we have the software team. You've got to identify common programming tasks. For example, drive to touch. I'm going to be driving until my touch sensor goes off a lot, so I better make a function to do that. Right? Parameters, functions, my blocks. You want to make code that's reusable and useful. Right? If you're using EV3G, you're making my blocks. If you're using Python or something, you're making functions. You're going to build a library, a software library for your team to use. Right? Share your code with Pathfinder, test code with Pathfinder and Core Robot. All those things together make a good robot team. You can move between roles or even finish a role. At some point, strategy is going to be done. Core Robot will be finished at some point. This way, everybody can be involved all the time. And they have to keep talking to each other. And make sure everyone is useful and busy. If you've only got one robot, that makes it a little bit harder. But if you've got 2 robots, you can keep a team of 10 busy with 2 robots easily. 1 robot, you just got to be a little bit creative in how things work. So, do you have any questions on the team roles, Daniel?
Nope, not currently.
Not currently? Yeah. Right. So, strategy overview. So now we're at understanding the game. Right. So we're about to have a look at this. Yeah. So there's a couple of rules on robots that apply each year, but they do change kind of. So City Shaper had some special ones. And your robots can look very different. Very, very different. So some important rules to understand. You have to read the challenge guide to understand the game. You have to. If you don't understand the rules, then something's going to go horribly wrong. These are the top rules that cause problems. Right, this used to be a rule, but it's not anymore, but I figured it's worth keeping. FLL is a game about loopholes. Look for hidden freedoms. Right, can I get someone to demonstrate for me the freedoms in the safety mission over here? The house.
You might need to push the camera.
Or move take the mission off the map. Okay, Faith, can you and Izzy show them how that works?
Sorry, there's just a cable in the way there.
Now put it on the mat, Faith, and lean across it.
Where?
Right there, on the mat.
No, you can't see that.
Okay, there's good then.
So the way this one works is you have to have the house.
Lower, Faith.
Is that right?
Yeah.
No. So you have these blue beams, and they had to be knocked out, and the house had to still be standing. So, sorry. So this counted as this counted as scoring. That counted as scoring. And this counted as scoring because the house is just supported by the blue beams. So there's all sorts of loopholes you can exploit with rules.
Yep. Okay. So if a rule is put the person in the house, it doesn't say they have to go through the door. It doesn't say they have to be right way up. They could go through a window. They could go in legs first, head first, or bundled up into a little ball. So keep that one in mind. Beware of Captain Obvious. Sometimes the obvious way is the only way, but sometimes there's a lot of room for creativity. Right. Construction. This is what we generally know as the deal with it rule. Right? At tournaments, you should expect the mats to be different because they haven't been worn down as much. The tables are not going to match the ones you have at home. They're going to be little differences. The light levels are going to be different. So you've got to be ready to deal with that. Right? Do not depend particularly on anything outside the wall because walls can be different widths. There can be camera poles. There can be anything happening. So be aware of that. Now, can we see the inspection zone? Is that possible? Yeah. So in the current scheme, yeah, that's good. In City Shaper, the rules are that your robot has to fit in the small or large inspection area before a match. So over here, Hugo is showing me as a referee that everything fits in the small area, which gets us a points bonus. This thing we've built here, this is our Lego height ruler. It is the height limit of the robot. And as you can see, Hugo's robot fits beautifully inside the height limit, doesn't hang over the edges. So Hugo is now ready to compete. Sorry about that, you can set up now. Oops. So launch area is the area outside there, the quarter circle. That's where your robot has to launch from. So this is a big change from previous years. All right, this is the first time it was introduced last year. It did cause a lot of grief. So read the rules on that one. Home is that whole area down the side. The robot has to come home for the team to touch it. So again, hanging over the edge can cause a problem. Hardware, I've seen a few teams struggle with this. You're allowed one EV3 brick or one Mindstorms brick or one Spike brick or whatever you're using, one computer. You're allowed 4 motors max. When you go to the table, there should be only 4 motors with yours within 10 meters. It doesn't matter if they're unpowered. You can't use them as a counterweight. 4 motors total. If you're going to use it as a counterweight, you've only got 3 left. You can use as many sensors as you want, but you can only plug 4 in at a time. Do be aware, however, that infrared sensor is not allowed because it does potentially allow remote control. There is no remote control. All right. So before you go to compete, you should really turn off Bluetooth on your robot. Very bad things can happen if someone connects to your robot in the middle of the match. No infrared and 4 motors only. There have been problems, even at internationals, with these rules. No other electronics other than what you've got there. So no power functions, no pullback friction motors either. That's it. Pneumatics is fine. Rubber bands are fine. Magnets are fine.
As long as they're Lego magnets.
As long as they're Lego magnets. Yeah, everything has to be Lego. Right. Before the match timer starts, you're allowed to go to the table and check it, but you can't touch it. You can ask the referee to make sure it's all good. You can set your robot up, and you've got to have that done in 1 minute. 1 minute to get to the table and be inspected, another minute to get ready to compete. During the match, you're not allowed to take stuff apart. Right? So even temporarily taking something apart is not allowed unless you're allowed to. Twisting it is fine. Just be aware of that one. Right, you can't touch the robot. I'll skip through this part, but you can't basically touch the robot while it's moving, and you can't touch anything the robot is touching while it's moving. If it drops something, it's largely going to be tough luck unless it ends up completely in home. Now, those rules may change for replay, but just be aware of those. So I won't go spend too long on that. So when you arrive at the table, first thing you do is everything, or you can calibrate, set up. All equipment must be in the large or small inspection zone under the height limit. You then arrange everything in home and launch area as you're going to play. And then before you start your launch, everything still has to be under the height limit. And then in the match, any touch of the robot when it's not completely inside home is an interruption and you lose points. Right, so I will do a run here. So can we turn the camera to, so when you get to the, yeah, I'll actually stop sharing. When you get to the mission zones.
Stop sharing.
No, take it the other way, sorry. These are all the missions that you got for City Shaper. You will have all these for replay. Read the rules and understand them and what you get for it. So I'll skip through these so I can be at the right spot. Right. Oh, I hit the wrong button, but we'll stop there. All right, so Hugo is now going to demonstrate his robot. Okay, Hugo. We're not going to time this one. We're just going to play it. So can we have a 3, 2, 1 Lego, please, guys, for the first run?
And ready? 3, 2, 1, Lego!
So the robot's done its first run, it got back into home, and away we go. We're changing over the attachments. Hugo is Sam's teammates today, so he's going to be having his coach help him. Here's the swing. We're going for the blue building, the blue beams. Nice.
One down.
Oh. Oh. Now watch carefully, Hugo. Can't touch the robot, so it's completely in home. There it is. No, there it is. Next run, we're going to try and put the bat on.
Oh.
Oh. Oh, we got the crane. And that brings us to one of our robot rules. Sometimes the only explanation is that the robot hates you. On our last run. This is the last one, isn't it, Hugo?
This is the second
Last one. At this point, your team should be making a lot of racket.
Yay.
Go llamas, go llamas. And done.
Hey.
And cheer. Well done. Okay. Now, you will notice in that particular robot run, the robot itself wasn't doing anything massively complex. The lifter at the front of the robot was a nice rat gear system, but it didn't require huge amounts of complexity. It was reliable and it worked. Reliable beats super complex every time. Yep. Don't get too close, they won't see it, the focus is out. And because this is the donut eating llamas robot, we even have donuts all over the robot, which is my personal favorite. Lego donuts.
Do you want me to get that back to the slides?
Okay, so resuming where we were.
That was kind of at the right angle, so.
Just got to set up the share again. There we go. And now we're going to take a quick look at robot classes, which is an important part of the design. But we're going to skip through this because we've got half an hour left. So a robot class is basically our classification system for FLL robots. Now, class 1 through to class 4, a 1 is not necessarily better or worse than a 4, they're just different. So, a couple of things to remember as we go through this. The point of this is that it's also giving your teams an idea of what general strategy they can take. So we add new classes. None is better than another. Some can actually belong to more than one class because these kids can be pretty creative. Can also exist between classifications just to really mess with your head. So when we talk classifications, we talk a standard robot, which is something that has 2 motor-driven wheels, 1 or more unpowered wheels or sliders, and can use 1 or 2 motors for manipulations of objects. An attachment is something that can integrate with your robot and alters the abilities of that robot. It's usually powered by a motor, but maybe by other sources. Gravity, pneumatics, elastic bands are examples. And a frame is an attachment designed to be a vehicle that's operated by the robot. So basically a frame is a super attachment. So a class 1 robot, standard robot without sensors. Dead reckoning, may have attachments. All tasks are performed by the robot movement or motors. Can be complex or simple. There is a class 1 robot. Most rookie teams will have a robot like that. Now, if you are a rookie coach listening to this, I would strongly advise against building a class 1 robot. I would jump straight to a class 2. A class 2 robot. Can you go back a step for me, please, Faith? I went one too far. A class 2 robot is a standard robot with sensors and a core movement. So the donut eating llamas robot we just saw has class 2 elements. It has its core movement, which is its up and down lifter. It uses its sensors quite well and has the attachment. So there we go. So class 2 robot will have attachments that secure to the body, changing what it can do. The core movement is planned, up and down or running into stuff, solves most missions. Missions are carried out by the robot with abilities modified by the attachments. So that's our class 2 robot, our very first robot that we ever built. It was a forklift. Not quite as elegant as the donut eating llamas robot, but it worked most of the time. So a class 3 robot is again standard robot with sensors, heavily modified by attachments. Like the attachments really change what it can do. And some attachments are self-powered. That means the motor isn't necessary to make them work. So the attachments greatly alter the robot shape and function. They don't have to be secured to the robot, and the missions are done by the robot or by the attachments themselves. So that was our second robot. That's what we call a class 3, taking attachments on and off and pushing things around the board. Now, class 3 robot can work quite well, but it is mechanically more complex and does tend to involve a bit more labor. So class 3 is something that I would only pick if you know what you're doing. Class 4, and this is the type of robot we use. It's a standard robot with sensors that exists to provide power to other attachments. Here's an example. This is our robot from Into Orbit. The core robot, versatile device, has motors that attach to other tools. And the attachments fit on, over, or to the core robot in some way, can often be larger than the robot and can be left behind. Sensors are located on the core robot usually, but they could also be on the frame. Have a look at the robot coming down the path, you'll see what we're talking about. Slowly moving down the wall. And off goes the frame, and the robot is left behind, on goes the new frame. So that was a huge robot. The rules don't allow those anymore, but that's okay. So once you've identified what type of class of robot you want to work with, then we get into the basic design principles. So if you want to avoid making mistakes, these are the type of things you need to be aware of. Number one, design your robot so that you can get to the charging port and the download port. Hugo's smiling. Hugo knows about this. Two, if it can come apart, it will, and at the worst possible time. So maintain your robot and make it strong. Now, this one is highlighted and underlined and bolded and everything else. Be aware that your light and color sensors can be affected by pollution.
Oh boy, did
Right.
we find that out.
Yeah. Bright lights can wash out your sensors. So calibration and or shielding. We do both because we've had a very bad experience and we're now overly paranoid. So again, learn how to calibrate your light sensors. When you're line following, unless you want to get involved in a lot of maths, keep the sensors in front of the drive wheels. Robots should be balanced over the drive wheels as well. If your robot's tipping and not turning consistently, you have a problem. Support the drive axles. Faith, can you grab our bot and demonstrate how that works? Yep. So your drive axles carry a lot of weight and you need to support them on the outside of the robot or on the inside, wherever you can. Otherwise, your drive axles will end up looking like bananas. You guys support yours too, don't you? The outside. Drive axles are braced.
So if I grab our wheel here, I cannot move it. So we use stop-it axles. I don't know how well you can see, but the stop-it axle goes through the panel, goes through the panel and into the motor.
Right. Now, your gyro sensor can be fragile and doesn't like impacts, so make sure that you're protecting it. Now, be prepared. We really don't like building with robot bricks on the angle. They can be very painful to try and build, so keep it flat. And be aware of height restrictions. You don't want to have a robot that you can't compete with. Right, maintenance. Make sure you test your attachments before a match. Test the axles, keep testing them. They will eventually wear down and break. Clean your tires. Clear sticky tape. You want stuff that'll lift muck off the tires without leaving any residue. Check and replace your drive axles from time to time. You will see them wear down. Firmware and software versions, they do get updated, but please don't change them just before a competition. That's how to make things go horribly wrong. Anything that moves on your robot will wear down over time, so be ready to replace it. Check the strain on your cables. A broken cable can be a nightmare to track down. For strategy, never, ever rely on dead reckoning. There's just so many ways it can go wrong. Dead reckoning is relying purely on motor movements. Don't do it. Okay, never expect your robot to drive straight. No two motors are the same, no two wheels are the same. Your robot will not drive straight. If you have that expectation and code accordingly, you'll have a much nicer time. Now, caster wheels and slider wheels are your unpowered wheels at the back of the robot, or the front, depending on how you're driving. They both have different properties. Be aware of them. I always tell our team, the wall is your fifth sensor. You can square up on it or you can run along it. It is a very useful tool. Make every use of it that you can. Aiming jigs are good. Starting against a wall is better. And when it comes to missions, choose quality over quantity. You want something that works 99% of the time. There's no point saying you can score 500 points if you can only do it once in a blue moon when you're all hopping on one leg and humming the 1812 overture. If you are a technician, plan your match. Practice it. Tag team versus dedicated operators. We always use dedicated operators, 2 people that run the robot. Some teams tag in and out. What do the llamas do?
We have 2 dedicated.
2 dedicated? Yeah. Both can work, just be aware of how it happens. Right? Be prepared to deal with unexpected differences. There's a story about a team member, the robot never actually worked for them. It was just them. That one person, the robot never actually worked. And they figured out why it was. They were the shortest person on the team. And when they put the robot on the table and pulled it into place, they were putting force on it in an entirely different way than everybody else. And that was what was causing the error. When they got them a step stool, the problem went away. So be aware of little things like that. And your technicians should know the robot. They don't have to know everything, but they should be able to recognize when something's about to go wrong. And more important, they've got to be able to cope with stress because all eyes are going to be on them, and they've got to be able to cope with failure. Gracious professionalism, they've got to be able to display. And for everybody else on your team, the worse it gets, the louder you cheer them on. And that's important. All right. So I'm going to skip, oh, hit the wrong button again. So do we have any questions on that stage?
So about how long does it take for you to develop a robot?
Faith, how long does it take to develop a core robot?
Well, for us personally, we've taken 10 years to get this robot up to where it's at. We've kept on iterating on previous year's designs, making it smaller and smaller and smaller, making it easier to build, tuning up all the mechanics and stuff. But for a lot of other teams, for a lot of the teams that we mentor, it'll take them
A few weeks.
Yeah, 4 weeks. 4 weeks, sometimes more, sometimes less, normally to get a core robot built.
And what would you say is the most stressful part about the FLL competition? Would it be like, oh, the robot's not working, oh, my sensors aren't being calibrated, or what's the most stressful part?
For me personally, it's rushing from judging session to judging session with less than 5 minutes in between. That has got to be one of the most stressful things for me. But that's just me personally.
Izzy, what's the most stressful thing about competition?
Exactly what she said.
Exactly what she just said. Hugo?
I think it's forgetting a line in the middle of the presentation.
Oh yes, scratch that. Forgetting your robot for robot judging.
It happens. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to run through how we plan our robot, this process that every team can use to build an FLL robot, and then Faith and Izzy are going to run our robot, and then we'll take more questions. So you got anything else up on the stream at the moment, guys? No? Okay.
Let's keep going.
Right, so this process is how you build an FLL robot, or how we build it anyway. If you follow this process, you can come up with a really, really good design. So step one, decide your basic robot dimensions, right? You want to check out the field, figure out, look at the missions and answer, does my robot want to be narrow or wide, long or short, tall or low? That gives you something to work with. And again, with the team roles we were just talking about, this is something the core robot people and the strategy people all need to know. 2, you want to identify useful sensors. Are there walls to run along? Are there lines to follow? Objects to square up on? Which sensors are going to be useful? Step 3. Highways. Highways are an important part of building our strategy. Izzy, can you just put your head back a bit? Thanks. Highways are what we call reliable, easy to navigate paths on the field. Often there are lines and stuff on them because the map designers have intended them to be highways. So that line along the south wall of City Shaper, that's a highway. Landmarks are important, and you want to examine the board and look for potential paths. Identify your highways. 4, plot your navigation points. There are 3 types of navigation points in the Project Bucephalus method. 1, there's a strong point, an exact position. Your robot knows exactly where it is because 2 or more sensors agree on where it is. Remember, the wall counts as a sensor. Medium is a general position. It's got 1 sensor lock, maybe dead reckoning after a strong lock. You got a rough idea of where you are. Weak, no sensor information. You're based purely on dead reckoning. 2 dead reckoning steps out from a strong point. Knowing what type of location you're at, strong, medium, or weak, makes a huge difference in knowing what you can do at that location. If you're going for precision mission solving from a weak point, you are going to have a really bad time. Now, I said rotation sensors don't count unless a wall is involved, and walls themselves count as a sensor lock. Next, analyze the mission models. Faith, can you come over and do this? So every mission is assigned to a team member, and they've got to figure out what movements activate the mission. They've got to figure out how many ways can it be approached. Is it near any others? Can they be clustered? Could it be activated without a motor? What's the best way to reach the mission? And then compare notes. So can we see the elevator on that camera? Yep. So how can we approach it, Faith?
You could bring something up over it. You could poke it from the back. That's not as effective though. You could flip it over and then try and balance it out.
This side.
And once you can whack it that way on the angles, you can just run into it and you don't really need to use a motor to do it. So normally you just poke and play around with the missions, figure out what works best.
Thank you. So get your team on that. Get everyone to be master of one particular mission. Next, plan the robot runs. Use that information that you have to sketch the robot's path. Now, after each movement, the robot is going to be in a strong, medium, or weak location. Now, you want to plan your movements to avoid weak positions. You never want 2 in a row. And you want to find ways to get to strong positions at every chance. Here's an example from World Class. The wall, running along the wall gives us 1 sensor lock. And every time we hit a line, that's a strong point because a light sensor agrees and the wall agrees. So all those red circles and blue circles were missions we did as we were traveling along that line. And we tried to do them all from strong points. 7 is plan your robot layout, right? No pegs, no beams. Play with the layout. Where do the motors go? Where does the brick go? Where do the sensors go? Play with all those things. Do not peg anything together yet. See how many different ways you can plan it all together. Now, this leads you to knowing what your robot needs to do before you build it, right? So a common mistake, for example, is someone will build a drive system and brick and then try and add on sensors and motors. It's much, much better to plan it and put it all together as an entire unit in one go. You can integrate sensors and motors into the chassis from the beginning. And don't forget about the non-powered wheels and test it and test it. Make sure it can turn and move reliably. And if you're feeling particularly cruel, you can actually include more sensors than you can use at one time. I have seen teams hot swap sensors out in the middle of a match. although I personally do not recommend ever doing that. Now, here's some templates for sensors. The basic, if you are a rookie coach, I strongly suggest you start with this as your basic model. One touch sensor, one light sensor. You can now get to just about anywhere on the board and know where you are. You can do a heck of a lot with just those two sensors. And you can always put the touch sensor behind the light sensor. This is the reversible model. You have the light and touch on both ends. Suddenly your robot doesn't care about which way is front or back anymore. The dual line follower or single line follower, two light sensors out the front, touch sensor in between. You can line follow off either sensor and be offset on the line. Or you can be wide and get even more offset. So both these things, both these methods give you different abilities. Wall followers, well, you can use your touch sensor to know if you're actually touching the wall. Touch sensors can be quite useful. This is our configuration that our kids tend to use. Two narrowish light sensors at the front, a touch sensor and a gyro sensor. Now this is all done with EV3, of course. Spike Prime may be changing how this works, but the general principles still apply. Right. Do we have any questions on that before we get to our robot run?
So I got some general questions, I guess, or some questions going back to what we talked about earlier. Like, what do you do when a judge nitpicks your robot, even though all you did is competition legal? Like, would you try to reason with a judge, or would you go with their judgment? Like, say if I'm going on the field and something seems legal to us, but the judge does not deem it legal, would you try to reason with him and clarify the rules, or would you, yeah?
Well, if you know the rules and you argue with the judge respectfully, and it's the team members who do it, not the coaches, generally that's okay. As long as you're respectful and you realize that the judges do have the final say.
Right.
Because there have been instances where we think our robot's been scored wrong, or our robot's just in the height limit and they think otherwise. We've been respectful, voiced our concerns, say we think it should be like this, here's why. And sometimes they've gone, yep, okay. And other times they've gone, nope, and we've just had to accept it.
Don't forget to ask for the head ref.
Yeah, if you think that ask the head ref, see what their judgment is, because sometimes the head ref's judgment of America for a loophole is going to be different from the Australia's head ref judgment. Changes from different countries, but as long as you're respectful, yeah.
So, well, we're just going to move the camera around now so we can see the field properly. So keep talking, Daniel.
Yeah, no problem. Going back to team roles.
Going back to what, sorry?
Team rules.
Team roles.
Yep.
Do you guys have a team captain for FLL teams?
Yeah, Faith, you want to explain the team, or Izzy, do you want to explain the team structure? Oh, Faith, you do it then.
So what our team does is we use a subgroup system. So our team splits off into small groups of two or three, and each group has a subgroup leader. And what happens is for a core values activity or general stuff like that, we split off into the groups. The subgroups discuss their ideas and then bring them to the subgroup leader, and the subgroup leader brings it to the decider, who then makes the final decision. This way everyone gets a voice, and yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so what we're about to show now is a robot run. We will time it.
Oh, we're timing?
We're timing. Yep, they're ready for it. They're good. Now, the important thing here is to also watch how the operators move. Now, these guys have been practicing in a way that means that they can not get in each other's way. They don't waste time and they don't risk dropping stuff, do they, Izzy? Or Faith? Okay. So here we go. Ready for the countdown. And 3, 2, 1, Lego. You can see there, we're using the on and off approach and the quick change. Robot's back in base, everything lifts on or off, and not getting in each other's way. The rubber band loaded?
Yeah.
Yeah. We lift the traffic jam without using a motor. We flick the swing with a rubber band. Again, no motor needed. We line up on the wall. Going into the building. Uh-oh. Yeah, you catch the robot from there. Again, we're going to use the wall. You can see we've used the same highway twice, so able to reuse code.
Oh, of course, you get stuck.
Now, this is going to show an interesting part of our code called error handling. The robot has detected that the mission didn't work, so it's trying again. 25 seconds remaining. There we go. 20 seconds remaining. The llamas are going to catch the robot. Here we go.
It should stop.
2, 1, and that's time.
You see, it stopped.
Hey, well done, girls.
It stopped.
Okay, put the camera. Can you put the camera back or not?
Sort of.
So, what you just saw there was an example of a pretty good robot. The girls are pretty pleased with themselves how that went. Just a little. One mission failed. But you also saw the last thing I wanted to talk about before our time runs out, which is code. No, this one, not this. Yeah. So programming, there's one last thing you're able to do. As you saw with this mission here, the robot failed to lift it on its first go. And something you can aim for is the robot detecting that it didn't work and then making autonomous responses to recover from it. So the robot, the kids built, also has a timer in it, and they programmed it to not go into this section of the field if they didn't have enough time left to solve the missions. So that is something that you should aim for as a challenge. Make your robot intelligent enough to make decisions on its own and use input to change it. And that type of thing really impresses the heck out of me as a judge. Okay, Daniel, so that I believe is everything. Is there any other questions or comments? I've got 2 questions. What are they?
One question, I guess. How did you guys come up with your team names? Like Project Bucephalus, Donut Eating Llamas? How do you guys come up with it?
So Hugo can go first.
We came up with our name by voting on different parts of the name. We started by voting on different names. We came up with all these different weird ideas for what the names should be, but we ended up voting on one part of the name and then putting it all together, which made us come up with Donut Eating Llamas.
Izzy, do you want to tell the story? No, okay.
It's funny when I tell the story.
Okay, so our team name came from 10 years ago. We had a group of teenage girls in the team that were horse crazy, and they insisted on having a horse mascot. And the boys refused to be rainbow ponies. So Bucephalus was Alexander the Great's war horse. So by using Bucephalus, the girls got their horse and the boys got their dignity. So it all worked out. And on the plus side, we get to mess with judges all around the world because nobody can pronounce it. Though we did run into a team from Macedonia once that was absolutely delighted with the team name and insisted on photos. So that was pretty good. Now, I see we've got 2 questions from Rob Turok. Hi, Rob.
Well, sorry, but the time is up and we have to get ready for our next presenter.
No worries.
So sorry about that. But if you would like to finish answering up the questions on the YouTube chat, feel free to do so. And thank you so much for your insightful presentation.
Guys, come up. Come up.
Right. Thank you guys so much.
Hang on a sec, Daniel. Yep.
Right.
So,
thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.